Hey there, folks. It's Jay Frost speaking to you, of course, from the Philanthropy Mastermind series. If you are new to this party, welcome. If this is something you've experienced before, I hope you enjoyed this session. It's a little bit different from our usual ones, and I'm very excited to be sharing this information and a couple of new guests with you. It's also possible that you are from the podcasting universe or that you're with an organization that has a podcast, and we'd love to know about both of those things. So today in the chat, if you want, and I hope you do, I hope you'll just say hello, as people often do. Maybe tell us which part of the world that you're in, and let us know your name, of course, but whether or not you have a podcast or whether or not your organization does. Those would be wonderful things to know. And as Jack is also writing in there, we'd love to know about what your favorite podcast is. So answer any or all those questions. The more information, the better for our guests today. But before I introduce them to you, once again, I want to welcome you here. And I want to thank our sponsor, which of course is DonorSearch. You can learn more about them, since we're unlikely to be talking about their services today, over on the website at donorsearch.net. But it's also the repository for all they have let us do for years. This series itself goes back to 2016. We are now nearing our 600th episode of either our webinar, webcast, or podcast episode. And those, many of those in the last 2 years, you'll find on the DonorSearch site under the resources tab, along with a calendar of things that are soon to come. There are recordings there, as well as on their YouTube channel, and for the podcast, wherever you like to listen. So with that, of course, you can also check out a lot about your donors, and I hope you care about them as much as they care about your organization. So do check out DonorSearch as a way to learn more about them, so you can be in touch with their interests and help them to support you. Now, today, of course, we're talking about podcasts, which I have to tell you, I knew about the scope of these things because there are so many and they touch all of us. I mean, more than half the US population, for example, is listening to podcasts on a regular weekly basis. And that's true for everybody over the age of 12. It's also true that we have over half a billion people listening to podcasts worldwide, and millions of podcasts, including thousands, that's in the low estimates, of podcasts from the social good sector, nonprofits and people serving nonprofits, all the do-gooders, all the helpers. And that's a pretty exciting landscape. And we can see some of that in some of you who are there in the chat. So we can see Jen and Bonnie and Tiana and others. Thank you very much for saying hello and letting us know when you can about your own podcasts, including the You Are a Philanthropist podcast. There'll be more about Jen in a future episode. We have two of the podcasters who are doing a lot of work in this sector today, and particularly talking about something that was new to me until I went to Podcast Movement with Jack just a few weeks ago, and that is Podcasthon. If that's new to you, I'm not surprised. It was certainly new to me, but I think it may be one of those things that we look at in a couple of years from now, and we wonder why we weren't involved early on, in the same way that many of us thought about those early giving days. And people said, are people really going to give like that? Are they really going to do anything like Giving Tuesday? Did you ever hear about that one? Well, that's how it all starts, with a few enterprising individuals and a lot of organizations to back it up. And soon enough, there are a lot of people joining. And I think that's exactly what Podcasthon potentially offers. So with that, I want to introduce the co-founder of Podcasthon, which is Jeremy Mani. And Jeremy, do come on screen if you would. And as I'm doing that, I also want to welcome a friend of his and now a friend of ours, David Mendez, who, and David, please do come on screen as well, who has a podcast, the Pop-Up PhD podcast. So it'll be very interesting to talk to both of them about both Podcasthon writ large, as well as an active participant Podcasthon, what that means to David. So Jeremy, maybe we can just start by saying hello and thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being there. And sorry for my French accent. I'm a French citizen living in Canada, but I can't erase this accent. So I'll be pleased to, speak with you, talk with you, and with my awful French accent, but hope you will understand me. It's always a pleasure to be there.
We like all accents. From everywhere in this show. So thank you for being here. No apologies necessary or desired. In fact, it's really, really wonderful to have you. You are a co-founder of this thing, so I'm going to ask you a lot about that. But first, of course, I want to welcome David. David, thank you very much for being here as well.
Thank you for having me, Jay. My name is David Mendes. I am based in Montreal, Canada, and yeah, I am a podcaster myself. I have participated in the Podcasthon now since 2023.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm super happy to be here to talk about my experience participating, what it's meant to me, but also what it's meant to people and organizations and nonprofits I interacted with through Podcasthon. So I'm glad that you've created this beautiful platform to talk about these things, and looking forward to this conversation.
I'm just sorry we haven't done this earlier. So thank you both for being willing to talk about it and share. It sounds like there are going to be, I know there are already over 100 organizations, or I should say podcasts, that are registered with Podcasthon, and we'll get to what that is in a moment. But I understand you're also working towards 1,000. So Jeremy, maybe you can start by just giving us a bit of the origin story. What is this all about, and how did you and your co-founders decide to form it?
Thanks, Jay, for this question. So I'm Jeremy. My another co-founder is Yves. We are both French people. We were living in Montreal. I'm still living in Montreal. He's now back in France. And we are two former entrepreneurs, very fond of podcasts. And somehow we were asking ourselves what would be a non-profit initiative in this fast-growing and passionate environment, podcasting, this medium. So it was kind of brainstorming. We are organized as a non-profit organization ourselves. You may have heard about we, kind of contraction between altruism and the we are together. And so we tried to invent what would be a non-profit initiative in this medium. And that led us to this concept of Podcasthon. So it all started in France and French-speaking countries in 2023. At that time, with 300 hosts. So it was quite a nice figure to start for the first edition. And David was there in Quebec, but also some hosts from Belgium, from Switzerland, and the rest in France. And earlier this year, in 2024, in March 2024, because it's every March, we managed to bring together 400 podcasters, but we were much more organized with great partners like Acast, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, you name it, Spotify. So it was, much more enthusiastic, and the impact of this initiative was even higher. And the objective for 2025 is to open it to any other language, including English for sure, and US hosts. And that's why we're here to talk to you about that. So hopefully we'll manage to bring together over 1,000 hosts from everywhere in the world. And it all started, registration is open. I will explain exactly what it is, but just to tease a bit, we have hosts from Canada, from USA, from UK, but also from South Africa, and maybe Australia. I need to check that. So it started quite in a positive manner. So I'm delighted by that.
And just to dig into that a little bit more, so for those who are participating, are they mostly independent podcasters, or are they associated already with charities? How does that work? And then what do they see as the benefit to the kinds of causes that they wish to support through this effort?
Yeah, maybe I should start with the concept so everyone will understand, and then I can directly answer your question. But the idea there, the concept, is to convince as many hosts of podcasts as possible, including maybe you guys who are listening, to dedicate one episode of the show to a charity of their choice, could be anyone, and to release this episode, to broadcast it all together in a coordinated way, and that's in March. The idea of doing that in a coordinated way is to create an event, create a ripple effect, a massive effect of positive audio content, a wave of positive and inspiring content. And this event will be then amplified by partners like Acast and other, and with a lot of media coverage. So Yeah, it's really open to any host of podcast. Could be independent podcaster. Most of them are independent. Could be also networks. That's what we saw from previous editions. Networks are coming to join the movement. And the format is also up to you. Most of the time, it's an interview between the host of the podcast and, for example, a representative of the charity. But it could be you talking solo at the mic about this charity. And this charity is really up to you to choose. So it could be a very international NGO to a very local charity you care about. That's your choice. So it's really a question of raising awareness on the maximum number of charities. And you do that all together. We do that all together to maximize the impact.
Is there a coordinating function that you serve then as the founder, as the group of founders, to help people, let's say, identify and communicate about the charities and the causes, both individually as podcasters, but also collectively through Podcasthon? So the media, like you said before, Apple and Amazon and others and Spotify are aware of this, but so that the general public also builds an enthusiasm, sort of like Giving Tuesday builds an enthusiasm for giving on that particular day.
Exactly that. I mean, I'm fully aware that you hosts of podcasts that are listening to us, you can do that anytime, pretty much anytime. And you can invite your own charity tomorrow if you like. But the fact that we are somehow convincing you to coordinate the effort is what bring to the table many other hosts, and that's how we create an event with media coverage and with partners. And our role as organizing team is first to convince as many hosts as possible, but secondly, to coordinate that through a platform. So that's podcasthon.org, in which you can register, in which you can showcase your not only your thumbnail, but after that, your own episode. And that will be for any listeners, potential listeners, an opportunity to just visit the website and discover potentially 1,000 of hosts and 1,000 of charity via your talent as a as a podcaster. So that's really part of us to showcase all those episodes, but also behind the scene, if you are not too sure about which charity you might want to invite, to create a way to put you into relation with the charity. So assuming that you want, for example, to invite a charity talking about childhood, but you don't have any contact in this specific field, you just have to notify it to us. Could be directly through the platform or by email, and we'll find a way, to list, I don't know, half a dozen of charities that might match your needs, and then that will be up to you to decide which one you want to invite, because that's your podcast, your mic. But we somehow try to help you to do that.
Right. I know finding a cause that that is a good fit for the individual podcaster may be challenging for some. We have people in the audience who focus a lot of their attention on this sector, but I'm sure even for some of us, seeing what else is out there that we might be missing is always of value. This is probably a good time to pivot to you, David, and just ask how you came to be involved in this yourself. Is this something that you were, as a podcaster, already engaged in? I understand you do a lot of individual interviews.
Yeah. So I was not engaged in that at all before. So 2023 was in the middle of the 4th year of my podcast, it's a very niche podcast. It's called Papa PhD. It's a podcast about careers after graduate school. When I finished graduate school, I finished my PhD. I fell into this kind of and knowing that I wasn't going to follow up to postdoc, etc., and tenure track professorship, and I wanted to build my family and find a job in the job market, and I fell into this kind of big unknown and kind of a insecurity of not knowing what my degree was going to do for me except being in the lab, which is what I was in the life sciences. And I decided a few years later, and understanding that this wasn't just a problem I had, it's kind of a generalized thing after graduate school, I decided to launch a podcast where I would interview people first that I knew that had done different things after their PhD, but eventually it grew to, open the curtain on what happens once you leave academia or once you leave graduate school, maybe even to stay in academia, but what happens once you become a professional after having had all these years of school? And it's kind of a, it's kind of a strange frontier to navigate unless things go a certain way, very, very defined. But for a lot of us, there's anxiety, there's unknown, and I do that telling stories of one person, how they did it, the challenges they had, or people who have thought about it a lot and have things to share. And once I saw Podcasthon appear, it made me think about, because in this space that I'm in, which is career readiness tools and resources for graduates, I knew that there were nonprofits out there. Some, and the first one I actually interviewed them for the podcast and was in France. Actually, they have this huge MOOC, so a massive online training for graduate students in France, like thousands of people. And the what happened was, when I saw the mission of Podcasthon, I said, I had never thought of reaching out to these organizations. These organizations are serving my community, my listeners, but they're large. That it's not one-on-one. It's not a one-on-one thing. So I wasn't used to it. But seeing the project appear, it made me think maybe this is the platform for me to actually put these nonprofits forward, in the spotlight on my show. And so, yeah, it gave me the first push, and I've done it the next year, but I've also kept on, and I've done another interview with, outside Podcasthon, but with another such a nonprofit that serves the community. And it really kind of opened my horizon in terms of what I can do and how I can help and serve the community through my small little podcast, by actually thinking about how do I set up an episode with a team. Because the way I do it is with teams. I've set up interviews where there's maybe the founder of the nonprofit, one of the volunteers. There's a lot of people giving their time at these organizations. So one of these people, some of the team, to show my audience that, first, these organizations are out there. Second, they're composed of people like them, and so to me, it really opened up this opportunity to serve the community, but also to create this bridge between me, a single podcaster, an independent podcaster, and organizations that are often so large or have a certain size that they are not thinking of booking interviews. They haven't even thought about what format it can have. Well, now with Podcasthon, I have this kind of template that I can bring and use during Podcasthon to put one of these organizations in the spotlight. It even brought me to create a kind of a portable studio like kit that now I use for that. So it really changed the landscape of podcasting opportunities for me. Plus, there's this, giving positivity thing, because another thing that I know is an imperative for these organizations is to be very mindful of how they spend their money. And during Podcasthon, and also outside of it, when it's this type of organization, well, I offer it, of course.
You focused for a bit on this idea about the large organization and talking to an individual podcaster. And it's good for us to have a reality check. I guess most podcasts, I'm not speaking about yours, mine, or the work that you're doing, Jeremy, but most podcasts are in the dozens or hundreds of downloads, some in the thousands, and then very few when you get into the tens of thousands or millions. That's a very small group. So that means that many of us are speaking to specialized or highly tailored audiences of people who really need the kind of conversation that we offer. And when you go and talk to an organization, maybe for the first time, you might even be a member, but you're talking to them differently now. What kind of response do you get? And I want to ask you, David, first about what it was like when you first entered that conversation, and they might not have even ever listened to a podcast, let alone yours, and you had to try and recruit them as a guest. And then we'll throw it back to Jeremy, because I'm sure that when we look at this more broadly, you have podcasters of all different sizes and scopes, and they're all encountering the same kind of issue. They're reaching out to someone for the first time. It might be a lift in terms of getting a guest. So what was it like for you, David?
So it's a very interesting question, and the first thing is it's funny because all of these organizations, because we are all in this ecosystem, they know of my podcast. It's about now I'm in the 6th year, so they know, oh yeah, you're David from Papa PhD. But they never thought, oh, let's talk with David and see whether he wants to showcase us on his podcast. It just doesn't come about in their day to day. It's always been a surprise, then gratitude, and then how do we make this happen? Seriously, it's not, you said a lift. It hasn't been a lift at all. There's no effort apart from then sitting down and discussing details. And do I go to your facilities? Do we do this? The one with friends, it had to be done, of course, on online. But the other one that I did last year, I went to their place, and I was in the environment, and it's kind of it's a space where you can go and reserve slots of time to write your thesis or an article. So again, it serves specifically the niche community that are my audience. And I went there, and it was great. Seriously, it's surprise, gratitude. Okay, let's make this happen, and no friction at all. It's really a very, very gratifying experience. At least the way it's been with me.
It sounds like it must be affirming also, because when you've been doing something for 6 years, you're still doing it largely in a booth or on individual visits. You don't really know the personal impact you're having until somebody tells you. Now, obviously,
precisely. Yeah.
Jeremy, so what is it like when you look at all these hundreds of podcasters, all different sizes, scopes, and locations that are trying to find guests that maybe they would be looking for the first time, so they can feature a charity that they love?
Well, there are a lot of different cases, but first, I want to stress out the fact that among the 400 podcasters that were participating last edition, some of them were very successful podcasts with a large audience, and I may mention one who even invited the French president, Emmanuel Macron, at his mic. So it means something. That means it's a very famous podcast in France. But I do like to emphasize the fact that it's open to anyone. Could be niche podcast, could be newer podcast, and that's the beauty of this podcast, and it's the diversity. So among them, pretty much 80% probably of the podcasters had a clear vision, clear idea about who they wanted to invite or highlight, which charity they wanted to highlight in their podcast. So we didn't even have to put them into relation with anyone. And it could be a charity directly in link with their editorial line. Assuming you have a podcast about ecology, it's not that complicated to find a charity talking about that. But the same with art or even business. And for the others, either in line with their editorial line, but in some cases, it was also just charity they were caring about personally. And in that case, what I loved in those episodes is that, people listening to David, they are loyal to David because as a host, he convinced them that he's a talented host, and they are quite confident that the new guest will be interesting because he has this full experience of 6 years of having great episodes. So you're loyal to a podcast, but also to a host. And some of them were saying, guys, during this specific episode, I won't talk to you about my usual subject. I want to switch, and I want to talk about something I care about. And it led to very moving episodes, because if you appreciate the host personally, because you're kind of accustomed to listen to him or her, you're kind to be ready to, try something different this time and listen to a very different episode, talking not about the specific subject you have in mind, but the one that the hosts want to emphasize this time. and it led to very moving episodes. So that's a fact. A very diverse number of charity. Some of them are really internationally well known. Some of them are very local. But even if it's local and are not living close to where the host is living, there is kind of emotional connection, and that's what I like with podcasting. We quickly found out that this Podcasthon is about raising awareness, not raising money. That's an important point I want to stress out. We don't ask to the host to ask for donation or to donate themselves. It's really a question of raising awareness, because an episode may last, don't know, David, or what is the usual length of your episode? Maybe 30 minutes, maybe 1 hour, maybe more. But even 30 minutes, it's quite long. So you have time, to convey emotions. You have time to tell a story about this charity. What are the challenges they are facing? Why they are doing that? What is the current situation? And at the end of the day, if you're a listener, you will, after those 30 minutes or 1 hour, you may be tempted, to know more. You may be a potential future donator, future volunteer, because you are much more emotionally connected to this charity. It's not just brand awareness and you have these 30 seconds of advertising, but you don't remember anything at the end of this advertising or 1 week later. After a 30-minute episode, normally you memorize a lot of things and you want to be maybe closer to this charity. So could be a lot of cases from according to your audience, according to where you're living, according to the country where you are. But in most cases, it's very, really interesting.
It also sounds like both from what you're saying, Jeremy, but also you shared, David, that the very event provides an opportunity to maybe reach out to a guest that we wouldn't have thought about before. It's also maybe more enticing for the guest themselves, and it certainly might lead into a different kind of conversation than they would typically have because it's a special day. But as you pointed out, Jeremy, if it's not typically about raising money, I wonder, as you've had conversations, both you, David, from your podcast, but also Jeremy, as you talk to all these podcasters, if the organizations themselves, especially these charities, if they are looking for something tangible, if they're looking for a call to action at the end, or something that helps to persuade them that they really should go and participate, what is your sense about what the desire is on the part of those who are our guests for these sessions in Podcasthon? What do they want to get out of it?
Question is for me first?
Either of you.
Okay, I can jump into it. It really depends. I do have this example of maybe 12 or 13 different hosts gathering into a single episode. And they had this common theme, which is education, and decided to promote charities which are fighting against bullying at school. So in that specific cases, you don't need really money. You don't need money. You need information. You need to convey information. You need to give a number. You need to talk about the reflex, and that's what they needed. They don't need money. They need to talk about themselves and what you can do if you're a victim of bullying at school. For sure, it could be different for different kind of charities, but most of them, and I do believe that wherever you are in the world you are based, whatever your size, all those charities, all those organizations, they need awareness. They need to communicate, and that's the basic thing, because they need to enlarge their circle of supporters. And what I mean by supporters is potential future donators or potential volunteers, because that's one thing to ask money to your usual database of donators, but when it comes to enlarging it, it's not that easy, and it takes communication, and that's what we are doing, that to enlarge this circle. So that's a common basic point between all those charities, bringing awareness on what they do, and hopefully maybe you're planting a seed, and well, that's in March, so that's pretty much spring. Hopefully a few months later it leads to maybe a donation, maybe something else positive.
Right. Building your
Yeah.
core of, I guess, advocates and ambassadors, which is something that one of the folks here in the room is so brilliant at. David, what about your experience and whether or not there was an expectation that if I go and I sit with a person I trust like you and have this conversation, that there's some benefit to our organization? Is it awareness? Is it being able to build your volunteer core? Is there something more specific, or does it vary from organization to organization?
So in part awareness, yes. In my case, because again, my audience is very niche, and the organizations that I you know spotlighted, let's say, during through Podcasthon have been it's been their audience also. We share audiences. It's been definitely to have this visibility and this awareness, but I would say that there's been an added there's been a twofold aspect of an outcome for them, which has been first to promote well, to raise awareness for their existence to the wider audience, but to promote events that are upcoming in the next months, weeks or months after the Podcasthon week. And it's a very short term, let's say, outcome, but it's a real one. If you have this MOOC that you want to fill with more people, and you start, you're on a podcast and the audience is the same as you, we want one of the conversations right away, and it's something I do whenever I have a guest, whoever they are on my podcast, is there something that you want me to promote during the show, during the episode? And with these organizations, of course, they do, because they have a calendar of things that are upcoming. So that is one. And the other one, Jeremy mentioned it, which is renewing the pool of volunteers, of people who maybe are listening, didn't know that this existed. The mission resonates with them, and eventually, there's a call to action during the episode of, by the way, if you liked the mission of so and so, you can reach out to them and you can be part of a new cohort of volunteers. And because throughout the episode we've discussed how it is to work with them at different levels, so the founders, the people who are, let's say, like permanent employees, and the volunteers, they've already heard all of that, and they can now decide whether to contact them. So it's a great platform for that, and that's organically, it's been a conversation that's happened as soon as we have okay, let's do this together. It comes naturally right after. How can we bring people to the organization from your audience, and how can we tell them what's coming up that might interest them?
One thing that occurs to me as you're talking about this is that let's say you go to interview the president of an organization, and they've got a whole bunch of classes lined up. So it's very clear that they have a chance to talk with you and be themselves, which is always a plus for a guest, and to do it with a person they trust, and then to have a different sort of conversation. And then, of course, the tangential benefit is maybe more people, because they've heard this conversation, will sign up for the course, or will renew their membership, or whatever the thing is. But it also occurs to me that organization probably has a whole PR outfit internally, marketing department. They may even have a podcast. In fact, one thing when we went to Podcast Movement, and I don't know if you were there, David, but Jeremy and I met each other there. There was one organization, I think I can say this publicly because they were very open about it, CSIS, which is a think tank here in Washington, D.C., that said they had 22 podcasts. These are 22 different podcasts for one think tank, but that lets them address lots of different issues with scholars who have expertise in those areas, and presumably some are just the person talking and others are interviews. But the reason I'm mentioning is because some people might say, well, if they've already got 22 podcasts, why do they need to come on to, let's say, my podcast? But it would be a different experience, right? I mean, they're probably already talking in everything they do. How is it going to be different for them to speak with you on Podcasthon from what they can already do as an organization without you?
I can go ahead on that one. Basically, for me, the reason why it's different is because they don't they have no say in the script of how the interview is going to go. And the way I do interviews, they're not, super scripted. I tend to send model questions to my guests, but tell them that to not expect all of the questions to be covered, and to actually expect the conversation to move organically to a different place than what was in that list of questions. And it's the same with these interviews. If they land on the chair in front of you to be on your podcast, like you also mentioned, it's a moment for them to relax, and often, and this is interesting, to reflect on their work in a way that they don't do when they're on their podcast interviewing someone else. And that's, for me, it's a big plus. And I take a lot of pleasure as a podcaster when I see someone, especially like after the interview, often is when this happens, of, what, I hadn't reflected on this thing, and the way you asked that question really made me revisit something, and thank you for that. And these things only happen when you go onto someone else's chair in front of someone else's microphone, I think.
Yes. Jeremy, what are your thoughts on this? Do you see this occurring podcast after podcast after podcast?
I mean, everything that has been said is fully true, and I just want to add the fact that when David is talking about this charity to his own audience, is bringing new listeners potentially to this charity. Because if you already download one of those 22 podcasts, that it means that you're already involved in this charity. You're already aware of what they're doing. That's great. I mean, you need to have deep awareness on what they're doing on a maybe weekly basis. But a new host will bring a new kind of audience, and those people are really interesting for a charity to connect with. And on top of that, we as organizers, we're really struggling to bring even a new wave of listeners. For example, with people like, and I want to sing them, but organizations like ACAST, who are offering a very significant, highly significant number of 30-second audio spots to promote the event, bringing to the table new potential listeners that will somehow dispatch into different kind of episodes. So that would be new possibility for a host to gain new listeners, but also for the charity to gain new supporters. And what I mean by supporters, once more, it's potential donors or potential people eager to promote, to talk about it to the coffee machine at the office, to promote this charity or what they're doing, because they liked what they heard in this episode. So that's really beneficial for everyone, including from the charity. It's this way of enlarging the number of people they are talking to.
Jeremy, when you then take all this information in at the end of the year, since it's not necessarily about dollars, although I expect that some organizations are in fact raising more money or attracting more donors or getting more members or get more people to sign up for a course, or whatever the action item might be in a particular podcast, that even though it's not strictly about how many dollars are raised, that there must be some measures that you apply to say, well, this year, last year there were 400 podcasts and they talked to so many guests, and this is what happened as a result. How do you measure year to year what growth and success look like? And what are you looking at when you look at 2025? Not just in terms of the number of participants, that's very important, but also what the net result is. What is that measure? And then how do you look to measure it?
Wow. Literally, we spent days trying to figure out this out. And the truth is, the answer might not be what we want to hear, but we can't precisely measure the impact of the initiative. But because even though we were talking about number of podcasts, doesn't mean what is the audience behind them. It doesn't include what would be the consequences of listening an episode. And I can't say that. I mean, what is the positive impact of listening an inspiring episode? I can't say that. But we are absolutely convinced that somehow it's making a difference. So to go into a deeper dive, for one, well, just look at the sheer number of podcasts participating and the wide range of charities they support. It's a clear sign of positive impact. So hopefully we manage to bring more than 400 podcasters this year, and hopefully over 1,000. But beyond the numbers, we really pay attention to the feedback from both podcasters and the charities involved. So are the charities noticing an increase in awareness? It's hard to say for sure. But it's one thing which is sure is that nearly 100% of them want to come back after come back for the next edition. So probably it means that it's positive for them. And it's also a question for hosts. I mean, we also trying to make sure that hosts are participating 1 year after 1 year after another. And again, it's tough to measure if it's a positive episode for them, but most of them stick with the initiative year after year. So that would be my way of answering your question. It's clearly not an initiative, this Podcasthon, that will generate a lot of numbers and measurable impacts, that's for sure. I would have loved to, because I kind of have a rational mindset and almost scientific education, but no, I just have tons of examples saying that it's a positive initiative, and well, that will be fine. It's okay. We will live with that.
And for you, David, you are an example of this, right? This is how many years running for you? You keep doing it.
2,
so,
and now I'm gonna, of course, I'm gonna do 2025. So yeah, it's gonna be my 3rd time this year. Maybe this year I'll do a charity, a heart charity instead of a niche charity. But anyway, we'll see. One thing, you know, as an indie podcaster, one great positive how can I say outcome or positive metric of Podcasthon is that during that week, you who may have been recording in your walk-in closet for 3 months and are now embarking on Podcasthon and you have chosen a charity to support and to showcase on your podcast, all of a sudden during this period you are in in whichever documentation Podcasthon and social media effort Podcasthon is putting forward, you are side by side with podcasts that have invited President Macron to on the podcast. And so really I feel that this type of event is very positive for indie and small podcasters, because you feel less alone. It's also, you're not just, in a way, there's a positive outcome for you too, which is during that month, you're in this wave of positivity, number one, and of community and of interaction sometimes because you see these posts coming by and the PDFs that your team prepares or the files with the different cover art of the different podcasts. It for that month you feel like you're on Planet Podcast somehow, and more than that, you're on Planet Positive Podcast, and that's not negligible as for me, at least, as an outcome of this experience. And that's why I think also you want to keep coming year after year. There's this kind of critical mass effect that then during the rest of the year kind of fades away, and but it's very positive and it's very energizing when it's happening and when you're preparing for it.
I'm wondering if there's something that kind of encapsulates what this experience has been like for you, either with a guest or a conversation you've had, either during or even after the interview. Something that just speaks to maybe not just Podcasthon, but what podcasts are capable of, and which seems to be what Podcasthon, in my mind, is about. What the real potential. Is there an interview or a conversation you've had that kind of represents all that wrapped up into one, something that really was the aha moment for you?
In the context of the Podcasthon?
Sure.
It's okay. This is an interview that that was not during the Podcasthon, but it's something again that I did after having done the Podcasthon, and I went up to this organization because they do their event in the summer, so the time isn't right. And I've looked up to them and I've participated. It's kind of a summer boot camp, 3-day boot camp about science communication and science popularization. And I've done workshops about podcasting, etc. in there. But they've been there for a while. I've looked up to them a lot. And last summer, I offered to do this type of interview or of episode where said, like, I can go, I can interview people that are participating, and then I can do an interview with the team, like I just said. And it was special to me because it's an event that I like a lot. People that I like, some of the founders that I admire, and here I was in a small room with them. This is at a university, in a small like university studio with them, set up my gear, and then often people you admire, you were kind of afraid to reach out to them or to be close to them. Here I was in this small university radio studio, asking them about the backstory of everything, and then having this privilege and maybe even emotional moment with them of looking back. And the person was actually their last year of being involved, so it has given me the opportunity to have interactions and these moments, special moments, privileged moments with people who are mostly super busy and inaccessible. And anyway, it's something that I treasure and that I think I can credit Podcasthon for, because it gave me that inkling of, oh, this is something I can do. This is a service I can offer, and this is something of value that people can adhere to and can leverage. Then from within the organization, they can use the audio to promote, or if there's video, the video. So yeah, that interview, that moment, the discovering that it was the person's last year, so and feeling the emotion in the room, it's something that I treasure, and that I can credit Podcasthon for, not directly, but sequentially allowing me, or iteratively allowing me to get to that moment, and now knowing that I can create moments like that potentially in the future again and again.
And
I hope this.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because that's really something you need to experience to understand. This Podcasthon lasts 7 days, so a span of 7 days. That would be mid-March, but it started a bit earlier because all those hosts, they are quite proud, should I say, to promote their episode with the usual excerpt of interview. But this time there's this little extra that it would be for me complicated to explain, but this sheer wave of excitement, saying, I'm proud to be part of this edition of the Podcasthon, and here is the reason why. And I will talk to you about this incredible charity, or this incredible person I was interviewing, and it's really inspiring. And that's I was really relatively surprised by the fact that a lot of other people, a lot of other hosts are commenting the post on social networks, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, wherever else. And it seems to be completely genuine, and they do that with a lot of pleasure, because, as David was mentioning, for 1 week you kind of feel like you're part of a community and an event that is bigger than you. And it's not like promoting your usual episode. There's this little extra thing that I wouldn't be able to explain exactly, but you need to really experience it to understand it.
If people want to be involved in this in 2025, I know we've included a link here that actually, Jeremy, that you gave us and Jack has put back out, and I'll just read it for those who are viewing the recording, and that is you can learn more about Podcasthon at www.podcasthon, that's podcasthon.org. And there you'll be able to learn more, but also to sign up to participate, right? To be part of this collective
There's a
effort.
link, register. It's really a question of 90 seconds, 2 minutes maximum. It's for sure it's completely free. Maybe we haven't said it, but it's free for everyone. It's free for charity, free for host. And you will have a chance to register your podcast. That is mentioning a few information such as the name of the podcast, your thumbnail, your different URLs, your links on social networks, anything that will be able to showcase ourselves in our platform so that it's visible for any curious potential listeners and visitors on the website. We do have time because it's in March, but we strongly encourage you to register right now because that gives us an opportunity to start conversing with you, giving you some guidance, some support, answering questions, helping you to find a charity that suits you. And yeah, it's also a way of showing to the other that you're part of it, so that will maybe encourage them to join the movement as well. And we are strongly relying on this word of mouth, natural word of mouth, to promote the event because we don't have any communication budget or marketing budget. So that's really a question of helpful hands and word of mouth.
And David, I want to make sure that you have a chance to at least let people know where they can find your podcast. How can you tell us the URL for that?
Yeah, well, there's a website, papaphd.com, papaphd.com. The episodes are there. The links are there to the different listening platforms. If you plug in Papa PhD in your podcast listening app, you'll find there's a French version, but you'll find Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, which is the English version. Yeah, it's easy. Same thing if you're on Apple Podcasts. But Papa PhD is the original name. I've kind of extended the name because I was getting too many questions on whether it was about being a parent and a PhD. So I rebranded it to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. It makes it a little bit clearer. But still, if you use Papa PhD, because I kept it, you'll find me.
Thank you for that. If there's anyone in the group that would like to list their podcast in the chat, I'll make sure to read those out now. That's a little unusual for us, but I want people to know that you are there. I certainly see some names there that I recognize that have wonderful programs. We're happy to share those. And also, of course, you can always listen to what we do at the Philanthropy Mastermind series. We have a podcast that's distinct from what we're doing right now, but it sounds very similar to what you described, David, and had those kind of personal conversations where I've had multiple people who have been brought to tears, not because of any talent of mine, but because they had finally a chance to be themselves. And I think that's a gift probably that all of us are giving. And it sounds like through Podcasthon, you're just expanding that to a huge degree and focusing right on the needs of the communities through charity. So I want to thank you both so much for sharing this with us, on both those who are here live, with everybody who is watching the recording afterwards. And it'd be great to revisit all this after Podcasthon is completed in March. And so that way we can get a sense about the size, scale, and scope of this once all the other English language podcasts have finally followed suit and joined you in this great mission. Really appreciate you, Jeremy, David. Thank you both.
Thank you for having me, Jay.
Thank you. Thanks to you.
And I want to thank, of course, DonorSearch for making it possible to even have these conversations in the first place. I do want to read out a couple of the podcasts that have been listed here. I guess we have Medical Minute on YouTube. So thank you for that, Chris. And I won't read any others unless you list them. And then also, we'll probably be doing a follow-up. In fact, I most certainly will, through my own writing on LinkedIn, to list various podcasts that I'm paying attention to. So I hope you'll look for that. And you'll see a link to our podcast once again in the chat. So look for it there. Otherwise, you can look for the QR code you'll see in just a second, which will lead you to all of our content, including a recording of this. And we'd love it if you would subscribe to this series and follow along, and let us know what you want to see and hear in the survey that follows as soon as you close up today. So until next time, thanks so much for being here. Thanks to our guests. We'll look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.